Welcome. It's so wonderful to be here with you today, sharing about anomalous phenomena that require shifts in the scientific paradigm. As we get started, I first want to go over what I mean by these terms and definitions. So, anomalous is deviating from what is standard, normal, or expected. And phenomena are a fact or situation that is observed to exist or happen, especially one whose cause or explanation is in question. So what do we mean by anomalous phenomenon? What terms fit within this category? So some of you may have heard of the term extrasensory perception, or ESP. This is perceiving things in a way that are outside of our traditional five senses. It's bit of a catch-all phrase for receptive anomalous phenomenon. And some might find it a little less taboo than the term psychic, which also refers to the same things. You also have a number of terms called the clairs, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairalience, clairempathy. Each of these are a version of our five senses that go beyond the traditional sense of them, being able to hear things that may not necessarily, other people may not necessarily hear. Another example is precognition, presentiment, and retrocognition. These are perception of events that happen before, that people can experience before or after they actually happen, like sensing the future. We also have telepathy, which is most simply described as mind-to-mind communication. It's also the experience of receiving mental impressions, whether it's from another person or elsewhere. Another common term is psychokinesis, which is mind over matter without any physical intervention. And we can talk about this on the macro scale, in terms of things we can see with the eye, on a micro scale that you can only see with statistical analysis, and something that's called bio-PK, which is intention over living matter. So with all of these terms, people can get confused because there's quite a bit of overlap in terms of the terms and the meanings. What many of you may or may not know is that there's a whole field called parapsychology that studies all of these anomalous phenomenon, and that has been doing so for over 150 years. And that it cohesively attempts to explain what is going on here, how they work, and how we can apply them. There's actually been a whole book talking about the terms that apply to these anomalous phenomenon. So you're not alone if you get confused about the terms. It inspired me to give a new definition for the word called channeling, which essentially encompasses all of these experiences, which is this process of revealing information and energy not limited by our conventional notions of space and time, and that can appear receptive or expressive. The way I'm describing channeling encompasses all of those terms: ESP, psi, psychic, noetic, etc. And like I said, it can appear receptive or expressive, and that it exists on a spectrum in terms of how people experience it. On one side, you have very common experiences like intuition, gut hunches. On the other side, you might have more rare experiences like mediumship and trance channeling. And in between, you have the things that I just described: precognition, presentiment, remote viewing, clairvoyance, etc. So I propose that all humans actually have an innate capacity to channel, and that the way it shows up for them is unique to them, something we call the noetic signature. So the way that you experience these anomalous phenomena is unique to you. Do you get goosebumps? Do you hear voices? Do you get a feeling in your gut? And that everyone has the capacity to do this, and it's about exploring your unique way. We've done a number of studies now looking at the Noetic signature and its various characteristics, and have found 12 factors through factor analysis that kind of tease apart the major themes for how the Noetic signature shows up for people. And these do overlay on many of the historical terms that I just went through. So they are inner knowing, embodied sensations, physical sensations from other people, inner knowing through touch, inner voice, apparent non-physical being communication, knowing the future, knowing others' minds, knowing through dreams, affecting your personal world, visualization, manifestation, and healing. So what I've just gone through are a very broad description of many of these different anomalous phenomenon that we're talking about here. So I'm calling it anomalous phenomenon, but are these experiences really anomalous? Are they rare and deviant, as we saw in the description of what anomalous is? So I argue that they actually aren't, that these experiences are actually very common. If you look at prevalence studies that have been done around the world for a variety of these phenomenon, you'll see that the prevalence in various populations range from about 10% up to 70%. And this is from a variety of countries around the world, looking at a number of different phenomena like telepathy, clairvoyance, contact with the dead. We did our own study looking at meditators from around the world. It was about 1,200 meditators, asking them if they had any of these anomalous experiences during their meditations. 60% of them said that they had an experience of non-physical entity contact, and 56% said that they'd experienced clairvoyance or telepathy. So this is not rare. This is a common percentage. We published this paper in PLOS One along with many other aspects to this future of meditation research. We also did a study looking at 3 different groups: the general population, scientists and engineers, and enthusiasts. And we asked them if they had had one of 25 different channeling phenomenon. And you'll see these numbers here are incredibly high. So these are the percentages of those groups that endorsed at least one of these 25 phenomenon. When we took out the ones that we thought might be misconstrued as a normal sensory experience, it was still above 80%. And when you look at these values compared to other studies, we see that our studies line up in terms of the percentages, again, being quite high. You see from this that 13% was actually the lowest in one study looking at clairvoyance. So these are clearly very common experiences. So I would argue that we cross out this anomalous word from the anomalous phenomenon and just call them channeling phenomenon. So these experiences are very common, and most people can say that they've had at least one, but many critics would point to the subjective nature of them. Oh, you know, these are just people's subjective experiences. They aren't real. And yet I'm going to share with you many laboratory experiments that use objective measures that show that we can observe them. So when we look at the evidence for these phenomenon, we can look at the hierarchy of evidence where meta-analyses and systematic reviews are at the top. And we have done meta-analyses on these phenomenon. There was a seminal paper by Etzel Cardania who reviewed the meta-analyses conducted on anomalous phenomenon. And he looked at various receptive and expressive experiences. And I'm going to very briefly overview some of the evidence that we see for these, demonstrating the validity of these phenomenon. So let's start with psychokinesis, specifically with micro PK. So in micro PK, you have a target that is a probabilistic system, like random number generators, tumbling coins or dice. You have the experimenter that conducts the experiment, and you have the participant who is directing their intention towards these probabilistic systems. And we use statistical analyses to see if there is a deviation from chance in these probabilistic systems. So J.B. Rhine did hundreds of these experiments, and there have been meta-analyses done on these various experiments, have people directing their intention towards these systems. And we see that the effect sizes are greater than 0, and these are significant values. Now, they're still small. The effect sizes are small, but they're definitely non-zero, which is what we would expect if the intention did not have an effect. So moving away from dice, we went to radioactive isotopes, which were the first random number generators, and then went to electronic sources of randomness, something called random number generators. And Helmut Schmidt did a number of research studies in the laboratory where people were directing their intention towards these random number generators to see if the person's intention would shift the data that was being output. So there have been meta-analyses done on this covering over 90 different investigators, 20 laboratories, and they found a highly significant effect that the intention influenced these random number generators. What about directing our intention to living systems, to biological targets? We have a number of really fascinating laboratory protocols. One is remote staring. So many of you may have had the experience of being in a cafe, someone's, all of a sudden you get a feeling and you turn around and you see that someone's been staring at you. So this knowing when someone is looking has been experienced in daily life and has been tested in the laboratory through closed circuit TVs, through one-way mirrors. And overall, the results show that people can tell when someone is staring at them. These studies have also been done in something called attention focusing facilitation. So let's say you're taking a test, someone's directing their positive intention towards you. The people who have their intention directed towards you, they do better on the test than the people who don't have anyone directing their intention towards them. Another popular protocol is called distant mental interactions of living systems, or DMILS. This was pioneered by William Broad in 1977, and the Institute of Noetic Sciences, or IONS, and many other laboratories have looked at this protocol. Basically, you have a pair of people. You have one person that we could call the sender, and they are sitting in the laboratory looking at a TV screen. And when their paired person shows up on the screen, they direct their positive intention towards that person. Meanwhile, the receiver, the other person, is sitting in an electromagnetically shielded room. They have the physiological electrodes connected to them. So does the sender, actually. And they're just sitting there relaxing. So we look at the data from when the sender is sending to when they're not sending, looking at the physiology of both people. And what we find is that the physiology of the receiver shifts when the sender is sending compared to when they're not sending. And this has been observed for many different physiological signals like brain volume pulse, brain blood oxygenation, EEG, heart rate, and the signals in the skin. This is a chart from Etzel Cardena's paper reviewing the meta-analyses that have been done on this. So this is from, almost 100 different studies, and we see that the effect size, again, is not zero. The effect sizes are small, but if intention had no effect, we would expect this to be zero. Many people are interested in healing and the healing potential of intention. There have been a number of meta-analyses looking at distant healing, and we see that when people direct their intention towards non-humans, like in vitro cells, non-human animals like this mouse here in this picture, and also plants, that there are significant results demonstrating an effect of the intention, of the positive intentions that people direct towards them. In vitro studies, the effect sizes are about 2.6, which is the highest effect size we've seen thus far in the evidence that I've been sharing with you today. Non-human animal studies are also 0.25. Plant studies are about 0.2. There are also many human studies where we see clinically relevant improvements in people who have cancer, who have pain. We see shifts in pain and improvements in quality of life, in sleep, from people directing their positive intention. There's also numerous energy medicine studies like Reiki that include some intentional aspect where we see positive improvements from pain in humans. So that was expressive type phenomenon where we're using our consciousness to influence the physical world. What about more receptive phenomenon? One example is telepathy, receiving mental impressions from others. There have been a number of interesting studies spearheaded by ION's fellow Rupert Sheldrake, looking at telepathy using the telephone, using emails, using texts, and we see above chance results in many of these studies. We have an ongoing study right now on telephone telepathy that you can participate in if you'd like to. You can go to the website teletele.org, teletele.org, where you and two others can see how you do with telephone telepathy and how your relationship to the other people in your 3-person group influences the results of that telepathy. Another telepathy protocol is called the Ganzfeld, and this is where people get reduced sensory input in the laboratory, and the researcher projects a mental impression towards them. And with this protocol, we see, again, non-zero effect sizes and very significant effect sizes for the participant to be able to receive those mental impressions. We also see strong results in remote viewing. This is where people receive information from a far distant target that they've never been to. This also, remote viewing has many practical applications, from the military program called Stargate, where they did train soldiers in this ability and obtained information of military relevance, to finding archaeological dig sites, to predicting the stock market. There's been many applications to remote viewing. And again, we see quite strong effect sizes. In fact, remote viewing has some of the strongest effect sizes in parapsychology. There's also strong results in precognition. This is a task where you see 5 cards and you pick the one that you think is going to show up next. And we see again that these are non-zero effect sizes. When you have a forced choice of having to pick one of the 5 cards, the effect sizes are a little lower than if you have a free choice, which means you can write out or draw out what you think is going to come next. And then interestingly, presentiment, which is a type of knowing the future, but in the body, unconsciously having a reaction in your body to future targets, has stronger effect sizes than knowing it consciously. Essentially, our bodies know before we do. So I know I've gone over a lot of evidence very superficially and very quickly, but thus far, I want to summarize that these supposedly anomalous phenomenon are actually quite common, that they can be measured in the laboratory under controlled conditions. We see our consciousness affecting the physical world. We see people knowing things that they would normally have no way of knowing, and that these experiences transcend our conventional notions of time and space. The effect sizes are small, but they should be 0. So why do these experiences not resonate with our current scientific paradigm? Why do we need a shift in our paradigm? Well, it's all about our dominant worldview right now, which is materialism. So in materialism, the prevailing view is that all that exists is the material world, that time flows in a linear forward direction, and that traveling a distance in space requires time. But what we see in all of these studies is that it is not dependent on time and space. In the RNG studies, distance did not matter. In the D-Mill studies, the results we see are instantaneous. In remote viewing, distance and space do not matter. Similarly, in precognition and presentiment, time did not flow in a forward-only direction. So we need to go beyond materialism into post-materialism. Things like distant communication transcend time and space, and that does not fit in materialism, so we need to go beyond that. In post-materialism, we hold the view that everything is interconnected. And this makes sense when you think that we were all connected at the Big Bang. At some point in time, we were all connected and expanded from there. We also see evidence of this from physics, where we see quantum entanglement, where pairs or groups of particles are generated in a way where their components, their characteristics are intrinsically dependent upon each other, where if we take entangled photons and take them halfway across the world, when we take the spin of one and shift it, the other one spins in the same way instantaneously. And so here's this interesting paper that says everything is entangled. So this entanglement has been demonstrated in multiple labs across the world. We have seen entanglement in photons, neutrinos, electrons, small molecules, and even small diamonds. We've even seen quantum entanglement demonstrated with light from distant ancient quasars, and that this light was emitted 7.8 billion years ago and 12.2 billion years ago. These results are among the strongest evidence yet for spooky action at a distance. And so quantum entanglement is one way that we can observe this interconnectedness. So this also leads to this idea that consciousness, or what we call big C consciousness, is actually non-local, and that it doesn't stay confined to our physical brain. It expands beyond our physical brain. And perhaps this consciousness is the substrate of this interconnectedness. This idea is building with many academics, many great thinkers. One is Jude Currivan with cosmological studies, looking at how not only everything is interconnected, but that it is also informational, and that through this informational interconnection, we see the interconnectedness through everything. So many of these great thinkers are bringing the evidence to make this leap from materialism into post-materialism to support us in shifting the paradigm that allows space for these phenomenon that I believe are not anomalous to rise to the surface. So deep gratitude to all of the supporters of this work and for the hosters of this conference for me sharing here today. Thank you.